Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shantiri Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Saiva Narottam Devim Saraswatim Saiva Tato Jayamudiraye. Om. Good. Welcome back. We'll continue our chapter. Just to recap what we've seen so far in these chapters, this section. Nahusha, this great Rajarshi from ancient times, insults some brahmanas and gets cursed to become an Ajagara snake, cobra. And as a cobra, this is hundreds and hundreds of years later, he captures Bhima and is ready to have Bhima for lunch, as it were. And Yuddhishthira finds Bhima in the nick of time and asks the snake, Ajagara, what can I do to make you let go of my brother Bhima? Ajagara says, if you answer some questions, I can let him go. These questions are the key to getting freed from his curse, you'll remember. So the questions ensue, and the main question that we've been discussing is Ajagara, the snake, asks Yuddhishthira, who is a Brahmana? And Yuddhishthira gives a very unexpected response. In our last class, we talked at some length how a Brahmana can be defined in two ways. There can be a Jati Brahmana, you might remember this terminology, a Jati Brahmana and a Karma Brahmana, or a Guna Brahmana. You can be a Brahmana by Jati, by birth, or you can be a Brahmana by your gunas, by your qualities. And in his response, Yuddhishthira completely rejects the meaning of Jati Brahmana. And he's going to give some reasons. We'll see today his reasoning for rejecting the idea of Brahmana by birth. And he's focused exclusively on Guna Brahmana or Karma Brahmana, a Brahmana based on qualities. And he talks about qualities like Satyam, truthfulness, Dana, charity, Akrodha, lack of anger, Anrashamsyam, compassion, Ahimsa, and Grina, tenderness. And he said, one who has these qualities is a Brahmana. One who doesn't have these qualities is no Brahmana. So this is the definition, and we see this definition in many places. We commented in our last class that the abuse of the so-called caste system that took place, the abuses took place very willfully done by human beings with their own ulterior motives. There is zero scriptural justification for turning the so-called caste system into a system of oppression. It was turned into a system of oppression. No one can possibly deny that. But the point is that oppression was not justified at all by the scriptures, but instead it was a product of certain individuals who had their own agenda. Okay. So with this in mind, we can then return to where we left off. Oops. So here, in this current verse, Yuddhishthira is actually concluding his initial answer about why being a Brahmana is not based on your birth. Being a Brahmana is based entirely on your virtues and on your conduct, on your karma, on your behavior. Excuse me. Yatraitalakshyate sarpa, yatraitalakshyate vritam sabrahmana smritaha, vritam sabrahmana yatraitanna bhavet sarpa, yatraitanna bhavet sarpam shudramiti nirdishet, tam shudramiti. Sarpa, O great snake, yatra, the one in whom, etat, and you have to pick up the word vrittam from the second line. Etat vrittam, this conduct. What conduct? The conduct, as I said, satyam, speaking truth, dana, charity, anrishamsyam, compassion, grina, tenderness. So, yatra, the one in whom, etat vrittam, these virtues, these qualities, this behavior, talakshyate, the one in whom these virtues are seen, sarpa, O snake, saha brahmanaha, that person is a brahmana. Smritaha, thus it is understood, thus it is remembered. On the other hand, yatra, the one in whom etat, these virtues, na bhavet, the one in whom these virtues like charity and compassion, the one in whom na bhavet, the one in whom they are not present, what about that person? Tam shudram. That person is a shudra. Iti nirdishet, thus it is taught. So here we are, studying Scripture. What does the Scripture have to say about the so-called caste system? By the way, I keep calling it so-called caste system because remember in a prior class, we said the word caste is a Portuguese word and doesn't have any very clear bearing on the subject matter. So we know in Vedic times, this is a big topic, I guess, just to give one observation before we continue. So in Vedic times, in fact, the caste, this we'll call it what it is, Chatur Varna system. It is a system of 4 Varnas, 4 groups. It actually existed prior to the time of the Vedic rishis. We know it existed prior to the time of the Vedic rishis because the Vedic rishis made reference to an already existing social order. So let's be very clear that these 4 groups, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, these 4 groups existed prior to the Vedic rishis, which means, are these 4 groups fundamentally Hindu in nature, or are they fundamentally social in nature? Since they existed prior to the time of the rishis. Makes it clear, right? So in its origin, this 4-fold division was a social structure that actually precedes what we now call Hinduism. Hinduism began with the ancient rishis. Then, of course, it's an existing social structure in the society, so it got woven into Hindu teachings, and that's where things started to go wrong. And I don't think we want to trace the whole thing of how it went wrong. That's a long discussion. But we can observe that in Vedic times, it wasn't a problem. There was no discrimination or manipulation associated with it in most ancient times. It's a very natural, family-based structure. Basically, in ancient times, whatever your parents did, you grew up to do that, right? In modern times, you have a choice of profession. If you lived 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, you'd have no choice. So if you grew up in a family of teachers and priests, you would grow up to become a teacher or priest, Brahmana family. If you grew up in a family of, political leaders and soldiers, if you grew up in a family of soldiers, you would grow up to become a soldier. Kshatriya family. If you grew up in a family of business people or farmers, by the way, Vaishya means those who produce something, which is a product. So that would include business, it would include farming. So if you grew up in a family of business people or farmers, you would become a business person or a farmer. And if you grew up in a family of workers, you would grow up to become a worker. Any discrimination in that? That is the structure in the most ancient times. Then it became a curse on the culture. We know that, but let's be very clear. It is a social structure, preceded the ancient rishis, and got woven into Hindu teachings, but there's absolutely zero scriptural support for using it for the sake of discrimination or repression. The discrimination and repression that we know about is a product not of scripture, it's a product of human beings. Okay, enough said. So, Yuddhishthira completes his answer by saying a Brahmana is one who has these great qualities, the qualities of Brahmana. If you don't have those qualities, you're no Brahmana, you're a Shudra. The snake has a follow-up question. Sarvavacha, Yadite vrittato rajan, Yadite vrittato Brahmana prasamikshitaha, Brahmana prasamikshitaha, Yartha jatis tadayushman, Yartha jatis tadayushman, Kritir yavan nadrishyate, Kritir yavan nadrishyate. So what is the snake's follow-up question? Yadite Rajan, Rajan, O king, O Yuddhishthira, Yadi, if for you, if you say that Brahmana, the first two lines we have to skip around, if you say that a Brahmana is prasamikshitaha, recognized, if you say that a Brahmana is recognized, how? Vrittataha, according to vritta, according to behavior, according to karma, according to gunas, qualities, virtues, etc., not according to birth. That's the point. O Yuddhishthira, if you are telling me that a Brahmana is understood not by birth, but a Brahmana is understood by one's behavior, then, the last line, then, kritihi yavat nadrishyate, the one in whom those, let's see, kritihi yavat, when these virtues are not seen in a person, then that person is not a Brahmana, referring to what Yuddhishthira has just taught. If you say that a Brahmana is determined by virtues, and if those virtues are absent, the person is not a Brahmana, then the question is in the third line. He says, then, vyarta jatihi tada. Tada, then, Ayushman, O long-lived Yuddhishthira, Ayushman, O long-lived Yuddhishthira, then, tada, then, jatihi, birth, vyarta, is meaningless. That's what the snake has understood. Jatihi vyarta, the condition of your birth is meaningless. Correct. And that's exactly what Yuddhishthira is going to say. Let's just reflect on that. It is more true today than ever before in human culture. If we were born 3,000 years ago, the conditions of your birth would be crucial in molding your entire life. Being born in the 21st century, it has never been less so that the condition of your birth molds your life. There is so much freedom today that hasn't existed before, and already, if we wanted to put an age or a date on this dialogue, we'd put it at least 2,000 years ago. So already 2,000 years ago, they were observing already that jati vyartaha, the conditions of your birth, are meaningless. What counts is what you make of your life. Of course, we all know this very well. But remember, in ancient times, it was somewhat debated. Today, we don't debate. So the snake says, O Yuddhishthira, if you're telling me that a Brahmana is determined by virtues and behavior, then this idea of jati, birth, is vyartha, is meaningless. Is that what you're saying, Yuddhishthira? This is the question put to Yuddhishthira, to which he responds. Yuddhishthira vacha, Yuddhishthira vacha, jatiratra mahasarpa, jatiratra mahasarpa, manushyatve mahamate, manushyatve mahamate, sankarat sarva varnanam, sankarat sarva varnanam, dushparikshyeti me matihi, dushparikshyeti me matihi. Mahasarpa, O great snake, mahamate, O intelligent snake. How many snakes are intelligent? This one is highly intelligent because Nahusha was this Rajarshi. He was a kingly rishi. So a royal rishi, Rajarshi. So he was no ordinary person. So apparently in the form of the cobra, he has maintained all of his prior intelligence. So, O Mahamate, O wise one, he says, Jatihi, Yuddhishthira says, Jatihi, the condition of birth, the family of birth, Manushyatve, with regard to human beings. So for human beings, the condition of birth, go down to the third line. He says, Me matihi, Yuddhishthira says, in my opinion, Me matihi, in my opinion, Jati is what? Dushpariksya iti. Dushpariksya jatihi. Jati is difficult to ascertain. That's what he says. He says, Me matihi, in my opinion, jatihi dushpariksya is difficult to ascertain. Why? In the third line. Sankarat sarva varnanam. Because of the sankara intermixture varnanam, of the varnas, of the four groups. Remember, this is at least 2,000 years ago. So already at 2,000 years ago, there was sufficient intermarriage of these four groups that in Yuddhishthira's opinion, that jati is no longer valid. Imagine if it was not valid in Yuddhishthira's time, how much less valid in medieval times and modern times. Let's be very clear about it. So already in Yuddhishthira's time, there was also already so much sankara, so much intermixture that jati became meaningless. And that intermixture just continues to grow and grow and grow. Allow me just to share with you a kind of a strange observation. You know, we see, in our age, we see the intermixture of cultures to an extent that we've never seen before in human culture. Suppose you could flash forward several hundred years. Suppose you could come back to New Jersey, whatever it would be. We don't know if it'll be called New Jersey several hundred years ago, whatever it is called. Suppose you could come back here, say, 500 years from now, 400 years from now, and you would meet the people who lived here. What would you notice about them? There'd be one thing, we don't think about this, but it's true. One thing we would notice is everyone is the same color. Right? Eventually, all human beings will be more or less the same color. It'll take some time. This is Sankarat Varnanam, Sarva Varna. This is the intermixture of groups. So that intermixture already at Yuddhishthira's time was so much already that he felt, he says, Mematihi, in my opinion, this is not a valid distinction. It is not valid to base anything on jati. And it's not only Yuddhishthira's opinion, which he's going to back it up with some further evidence in this next verse. He says, Vritya Shudrasa Mohyesha vritya shudra samohe yavat vedena jayate yavat vedena asmin hevam matirdvaidhe asmin hevam matir manu swayambhuvo bravita manu swayambhuvo. Look at the last line. This is not only Yuddhishthira's opinion, but then he calls on, what is the opinion of Swayambhu Manu, the author of the Manu Dharma Shastra? So what is the opinion of Manu? He is considered the great lawgiver, the one who codified the laws at that time and place, Manu. And he's also, Swayambhu is like a title given to Manu. So this rishi called Manu, Swayambhu, is his title. What did he abravit? He taught. What did he taught? What did he teach? In the second line, he taught, Yavat Vedena Jayate. First line, Vritya Shudra Shamaha Eshaha. So this is what Manu taught. This is a little different. So Manu taught what? Yavat Vedena Jayate. As long, until you are initiated, Jayate, until you are initiated into what? Vede, into the Veda. Until you are initiated into Vedic study, Vritya Shudra Shamaha Hi Eshaha. Eshaha, that person is Shudra Samaha, is equivalent to a Shudra Vritya, according to their behavior, according to their conduct. So I'll paraphrase that for you. According to Swayambhu Manu, until a person is initiated into Vedic study, that person cannot be considered a Brahmana. That person is considered like a Shudra. Any reference to birth? No reference to birth. So according to Manu, what determines your status as a Brahmana is being initiated into Vedic study. By the way, Vedanta is the last part of the Vedas, right? What do we study here? Vedanta, which is Vedas. So therefore, you're all Brahmanas. According to Manu, you have all been initiated into Vedic study. That's what he says. You've all been initiated into Vedic studies. Therefore, having been initiated into Vedic studies, you're a Brahmana. On the other hand, someone who's born in a Brahmana family, if they haven't been initiated into Vedic study, then according to Manu, they are Shudra Samaha. They are no better than Shudras Vritya, according to their behavior, according to their lives. And finally, Yuddhishthira says, Asmin evam mati dvaidhe. Asmin, in this subject matter, there is evam, thus, there is mati dvaidha. Mati dvaidha, multiplicity of interpretations. There is no one fixed mode of interpretation, but there are different people, different teachers with different opinions. What an honest and realistic observation on this topic. You know, what a shame if anyone tries to be rigid when it comes to this particular topic. So here, even Yuddhishthira, even if we think there are a multiplicity of opinions on this topic today, once again, even in Yuddhishthira's time, there is a multiplicity of opinions. So, etasmin, in this regard, asmin, in the subject matter, evam, thus, mati dvaidhe, there are a variety of opinions. And now the snake is satisfied. He's got his answer. Sarpavacha, Shrutam vidita vedyasya, Shrutam vidita vedyasya, Tavavakyam Yuddhishthira, Tavavakyam Yuddhishthira, Bhakshayeyamaham kasmad, Bhakshayeyamaham kasmad. There's a typo here. Bhrataram. Bhrataram te vrikodaram, bhrataram te vrikodaram. Then the second line. Tava vakyam, Yuddhishthira, O Yuddhishthira, tava vakyam, your statement, your words, shrutam, I have heard. I have heard what you have said, and vidita vedyasya, I have heard what I need to hear. Why does he need to hear it? He wants to get free from his curse. This is it. Because he wanted to understand what is a Brahmana, but his ultimate goal is to become free from his curse. So vidita vedyasya, what I needed to hear, what I needed to learn, I have heard from you, Yuddhishthira. He says then, kasmat, then for what reason, aham bhakshayeyam, for what reason would I eat te bhrataram, your brother, vrikodaram? Why would I eat your brother, Vrikodara, his name, the one who has a belly like a wolf? We talked about that. For what reason would I eat your brother, your brother, since you have answered my question? We'll see in the next chapter when he finally gets free from the curse. But the idea is he's not going to remain as a cobra for long. The curse has been broken. For the time being, he still appears as a cobra, but that will soon come to an end. Why? He had learned from Yuddhishthira what he needed to learn. Remember, Agastya's curse was that he would remain as a cobra until his questions were answered by a wise person. His questions have just been answered by a wise person. Agastya's curse has been broken. He's not going to remain as a snake for long. Therefore, there's no reason for him to have bhima for lunch. And that ends that chapter and leads to the next chapter. In the next chapter, notice so far, Ajagara, the snake, has been asking Yuddhishthira questions. Now Yuddhishthira is going to turn the tables. Yuddhishthira is going to ask questions of the Ajagara, of the snake. Why? Two reasons. One is Dhritarashtra wants to understand Dharma. We call him Dharma Raja, the king of Dharma. How did he get to be so wise with regard to Dharma? How does anyone get to be wise in any subject matter whatsoever? No one is born with that wisdom. Wisdom is acquired. How is wisdom acquired? By learning. How does that learning take place? Not necessarily by one guru, but maybe by dozens or hundreds of teachers. So Yuddhishthira wants to learn wherever and whenever he can. He wants to learn more about Dharma. So now Yuddhishthira is going to ask some questions of Nahusha in the form of the cobra, so that Yuddhishthira can learn more about Dharma. So he asks, Yuddhishthira vacha, Yuddhishthira vacha, Dharmadva sarpa satyadva, Dharmadva sarpa satyadva, Yamato guru drishyate, Yamato guru drishyate, Ahimsa priyayoschaiva, Ahimsa priyayoschaiva, Guru laghava muchyatam, Guru laghava muchyatam. So he asks two questions about two pairs of qualities. Danat satyatva. Kim ataha guru drishyate. He says, between these two, Sarpa, or snake, between these two, between what? Dana, charity, and satya, truthfulness. So between dana, charity, and satya, truthfulness, kim ataha guru. Which one is more guru? Huh? If you know a little bit of Sanskrit, you'll know that guru as an adjective means heavy. That's right. Guru as a noun, you know. Guru as an adjective means heavy and by extension important. important in the sense of, like we use the word in English, weighty, in that sense. Heavy in the sense of important, weighty. So he says, when comparing dana, charity, and satya, truthfulness, kim ataha guru drishyate, which one drishyate is seen to be more guru, to be more important? That's his first question. Second question is ahimsa priyayoho, between ahimsa, not harming, and priya, love, affection, between being harmless and being affectionate. Right? Just a quick comment. Please don't translate ahimsa as nonviolence. Please. Because if ahimsa means nonviolence, if I can hurt you but not violently, is it okay? All right. So ahimsa means not harming. Any kind of harm, including emotional harm. So comparing ahimsa, harmlessness, and priya, affection. When comparing ahimsa and affection, he says, Guru laghavam uchyatam. You should tell me which is guru, more important, and which is laghava, less important. Literally, which is heavier and which is lighter, but figuratively meaning, which is more important, which is less important. So the two questions between dana, charity, and satya, truthfulness, which is more important, and between ahimsa, harmlessness, and priya, affection, which is more important. So you can see Yuddhishthira's thirst to understand Dharma even better. Consider that he's already considered the wisest person with regard to Dharma. Then why is he asking this question? He wants to know even better. What a nice role model. So the one who's already considered to be the wisest with regard to Dharma, he still wants to understand more. Wonderful. So, what does Ajagara reply? Sarpuvacha, dane ratatvam satyam cha, dane ratatvam satyam. Ahimsa priyameva cha, ahimsa esham karyagarhiyastvat, esham karyagarhiyas drishyate guru laghavam, drishyate guru laghavam. Vratatvam, commitment. Commitment dane, to charity, or satyam, truth. Commitment to charity and truth. Ahimsa and priyam, what your commitment to charity, to truth, or to harmlessness, or to affection. He says, esham, for all of these, look in the last line, guru laghavam drishyate. Same expression, guru, heavy, laghava, lightness, but in context, which one is more important, which one is less important. So the relative importance of these, drishyate, is seen, esham, so of these four, the guru laghavam, the relative importance, drishyate, is seen, how? Karya gariyastvat. Very clear expression. Gariyas is another word meaning importance. Karya gariyastvat, according to the importance of the result. So what is he saying? He's saying that the relative merits of these qualities depends on the karya, on the result. Now this is a really important point. I'd like to let's spend a few minutes and understand the significance of the statement. He says what is important is not the virtue or practice of the virtue. He says what is important is the consequence of the practice of the virtue. It's not speaking truth that's important, but the consequence of speaking truth that's important. It's not charity that's important, but the consequence of charity that's important. Let's be clear. If you give charity to an organization, by the way, people donate money to the Taliban. You know that. I'm telling you. People give money. They give the charitable donations to the Taliban. That's Dana. So that's why he says, no. He says, you have to judge it according to the karya, according to the results, according to the consequences. Similarly, satyam, telling truth. Telling truth is not the important. It's the consequence of telling truth. Sometimes if you tell truth, you cause harm. I gave a silly example. So your friend is wearing, the ladies are like this, your friend is wearing some clothing that you think looks ridiculous. So you tell her, that really looks ridiculous. You're being truthful. How absurd. And this applies also to ahimsa. How about a good example of ahimsa? In your kitchen, there are thousands of ants. You should protect those ants. Ahimsa. Priya, affection. Affection to whom? I don't know if you make this Donald Trump your buddy. I'm not sure that's a good thing. By the way, if I pushed your button, I apologize, but anyway, that's my opinion. So what is the point Yuddhishthira is making? And there's actually something really important to underline. First of all, on the surface, it's pretty obvious that we have to think more deeply about these things. You can't simply say, is charity better or is speaking truth better? Is harmlessness better or is affection better? And Yuddhishthira's message is you can't just say that. You have to think about it. You have to analyze each according to their effects, according to their results, according to their consequences. Now, this is a topic that actually Puja Swami Tadatmananda felt very strongly about. He observed that in Hindu religion and elsewhere, that there are some people who rigidly cling to rules. Rules like what? Speak truth. Rules like what? Ahimsa. Always practice ahimsa. But if you rigidly cling to a rule like satyam, then you're going to tell your friend that her outfit looks ridiculous. If you rigidly cling to this value of ahimsa, then you're going to let your kitchen be overrun by insects. It's so obviously wrong, but look what happens in not just Hinduism, in every religious tradition. There's a tendency for people to cling rigidly to a rule. Puja Swamiji was highly critical of this. Clinging rigidly to rules, there's a nice word of Greek origin that we use for this. Philosophers use this word a lot. It's called orthodoxy. Orthodox. Ortho, in a line. Dox means doctrine. To be in line with the doctrine. What is a doctrine? Taittiriya Upanishad says, Satyam Vada. Speak truth. Your outfit looks ridiculous. So, that's orthodoxy. Puja Swamiji said, very nice, he said this long ago. This is probably, I heard him say this in the 1970s. He said, this is close to a direct quotation. He said, I do not consider myself orthodox. He said, I consider myself traditional. That's an interesting contrast between orthodox and traditional. What is the difference? Well, the very word orthodox means in line with the doctrine. That's that rigid clinging to rules. Then how do we contrast that with being traditional? And the way Puja Swamiji defined it is the difference. He used the words form and, what was it? He did form and content. Yeah, form and content. So he said that religious teachings have a certain form. For example, when Scripture says Satyam Vada, that's a form of teaching. When a Scripture says Ahimsa Paramo Dharma, that's a form. So he said that religious teachings take a certain form, but you have to go beyond the form and find the content. Little difference, like the difference between a container and the content. Suppose you have a container of food, a can, a tin of beans. So it's not the can that's important, it's what's inside the tin that's important. So this was his differentiation between form and content. Our scriptures have a certain form. And in that form, statements like Satyam Vada, speak truth, come out. Ahimsa Paramo Dharma, Ahimsa is the ultimate value. This constitutes the form of Hinduism. Someone who clings rigidly to the form is orthodox. He distinguishes that from being traditional, and in his language, to be traditional means to leave the form aside and look at the content. You put that can aside and you eat the beans inside. So according to Puja Swamiji, you put the details of the form aside and you go deeply within to discover the content. This is his distinction then between orthodox and tradition. And we can see here that now who is teaching? Now Sarpa, Ajagara, who was Nahusha in the form of the snake, he's now giving Yuddhishthira this instruction. Yuddhishthira asked about these four values, which is more important, which is less important. And what is Ajagara's advice? He says what is really important is the result. In fact, he's making that same distinction between form and content. So therefore, Dana and Dana and Satya are the form. Ahimsa Dana and Satyam are the form. Ahimsa and Priya are the form. What is the content? The content is whatever is karya gariyat, whatever has the best outcome, whatever leads to the best result. So it's a rejection of rigidly clinging to rules. Just one fast observation before we continue. Another problem that we've seen, not just in Hinduism, but in every religious tradition, there are some people who just want to cling to rules, and they become very rigid about it. We call such people fundamentalists, and we find those fundamentalists in every religion without exception, including in Hinduism. Maybe it's a little less obnoxious in the Hindu tradition, but it certainly is present in the Hindu tradition. And wherever it exists, it's definitely a problem, and it's definitely contrary to this distinction between form and content, this distinction between orthodox and tradition. So we should always be alert to recognize fundamentalism in any of its forms and reject it. Just to show you how, even today, it continues to be a problem. So one politician, most of you follow the news in India, one politician says, everyone should say, Bharat Mata ki Jai. And some Muslim politician says, I'm not going to say it. And he says, I'm not, oh, allow me. We're in for it now. Good modern example. So anyway, Bharat Mata ki Jai means Hail Mother India. It's treating Mother India like a goddess. India as a goddess. And of course, for Muslim Indians, that's not palatable because they don't want to pray to some goddess, they want to pray to Allah. But the Hindu politician says, no, if you're an Indian, if you're a Bharatiya, you have to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. So this Muslim politician says, I won't say it even if you cut off my neck, even if you chop off my head. He says, I won't say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, even if you chop off my head. And then a Hindu religious teacher, whom I shall not name, says, we can cut off a lot of heads. He said, one of the leading religious teachers in India today said, in response to this, we can cut off a lot of heads. And I'll name him. This is Baba Ramdev. He said, we can cut off a lot of heads. What is that? That's that fundamentalism. Come on. We have to grow up and grow out of all of that stuff. I'm sorry for being a little worked up on this, but this stuff just drives me nuts, and especially when a highly regarded spiritual leader starts spouting such nonsense. It does a lot of harm, in my opinion. It does a lot of harm to whom? First of all, it alienates all of our Muslim friends. Already there's enough communal tension in certain parts of India. No one needs to add to communal tension. Isn't that ridiculous? Who would want to deliberately add to communal tensions? No one wants to. So it alienates the Muslims. And then what does it do to more highly educated Hindus? It's a turnoff. If a Hindu leader says we should cut off the heads of Muslims who don't want to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, that turns off a lot of educated Hindus. And what does it do to non-Hindus around the world when they read this in a newspaper or see it on the internet? They see a Hindu religious teacher proposing that Muslims be beheaded if they fail to say this slogan. Anyway, enough said. Sorry. Enough. All right. So this is orthodoxy versus being traditional. This is the problem of fundamentalism. And clearly, Ajagara is not a fundamentalist. He says you can't go by the form. You can't just cling to the word ahimsa or priya. You have to find out what is the karya, what is the effect, what is the outcome of that. All right. And he explains. Ajagara explains. Kasmat chiddana yogadhi, kasmat chiddana yoga, satyameva vishishyate, satyavakya cha rajendra, satyavakya cha rajendra, kinchiddanam vishishyate, kinchiddanam vishishyate. Kasmat chiddana yogat satyameva vishishyate. He says satyameva, truthfulness, vishishyate is better. Truthfulness is better. Kasmat chiddana yogat, than some forms of charity. Speaking truth is better. I'll paraphrase. Sometimes speaking truth is better than charity. On the other hand, satyavakya cha rajendra, Raja Indra, O best of kings, addressing Yuddhishthira, satyavakya cha kinchiddanam vishishyate. Sometimes danam, kinchiddanam, sometimes dana, charity, vishishyate is better, satyavakya, than speaking truth. I'll paraphrase the whole thing. Sometimes speaking truth is better than charity. Sometimes charity is better than speaking truth. Shows the complete rejection of that fundamentalist clinging to rigid rules. Tell me which is best. You can't say which is best. It all depends on the situation. Our whole concept of Dharma is all situational. It all depends on the situation, which is why. Let me make a very important observation here. Sometimes people ask, in the biblical traditions, they follow a list of 10 commandments from the Bible, and it sometimes is asked, how many commandments are there in Hinduism? That's really an interesting question. Is there a list of commandments in Hinduism? Now, I have to say, there have been several religious teachers who have made up their own list. Maybe we can ignore those lists and look at the scripture. In the scripture, here we are studying Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, how many commandments are defined? First of all, what does the word commandment mean? A commandment could be defined as a moral absolute. A moral absolute means what? Thou shalt not fill in the blank. Moral absolute. Under no circumstances whatsoever shall you do this prohibited action. Those are moral absolutes, there are commandments. How many is in our list of Hindu commandments? There are no Hindu commandments. Why? Practically speaking, there are no list of Hindu commandments. Why? Because the concept of a commandment is a moral absolute. Moral absolute means a rigid rule. Rigid rule brings us back to this fundamentalism. What is Nahusha in the form of Ajagara? What is he teaching us? He says you can't have these rigid rules. You have to judge everything by the results, by the fruits. I think Jesus says in the Bible, you shall judge them by their fruits. Nice. You shall judge them by their fruits. And that's exactly the sense here. By the way, Jesus, just an observation about Christianity, Jesus rejected the fundamentalism of the Old Testament. Remember, Jesus was a Jewish reformer, and the Judaism of the time of Jesus was very rigid and rule-oriented, and Jesus rejected all of that. That's why they killed him. They killed him because he was this revolutionary, and he wanted to reject that rigidity and fundamentalism of the Judaism of his time, and he was executed for that reason. So this is why he said, you shall judge them not by their following the rules. You shall judge them by their fruits. And that's exactly what Ajagara is saying here. So anyway, no commandments. Commandments are moral absolutes. Commandments are rigid rules. What is the message here? You judge everything not by compliance to a list of rules or commandments. You judge according to the consequences of those actions. If the consequences are beneficial, that's good. If the consequences are harmful, that's the opposite. All right. Where am I here? Oh, sorry. Thanks. Okay. He concludes his line of thought here. Ahimsa drishyate kurvi, ahimsa drishyate, tatascha priyanishyate, tatascha priyanishyate, evam hetad bhaved rajan, evam hetad bhaved rajan. Karyapekshamanantaram, karyapekshamanantaram. So the first pair of questions was about satyam and dana, about speaking truth and charity. Second pair of questions was about ahimsa, harmlessness, and priya, affection. So that's the second pair of questions. Second pair comes now. He says, Ajagara says, ahimsa drishyate gurvi. He says sometimes ahimsa, harmlessness, drishyate, is seen to be gurvi, heavier. Heavier means what? More important. Sometimes ahimsa is seen to be heavier, something better. Tataha, but then again, priyamishyate. In other situations, affection is seen to be more important. So he concludes the same topic saying that you cannot say one is best, the other is not best. You can't be rigid. You can't make up these rules. Evam, Rajan, in the third line, O king, evam, thus, etat bhavet. This is a conclusion. What is the conclusion? Karya apeksham anantaram. Everything is karya apeksham. Apeksham means depending on. Everything depends on the karya, on the consequence, on the outcome, on the effect. Sarvam, karya apeksham anantaram. Whatever happens next, whatever follows. So, with regard to practice of any religious rules, what counts is the outcome. If the practice of a religious rule or tradition, if it leads to a good outcome, wonderful. If it doesn't, we have to be ready to set aside certain religious practices that don't lead to a good outcome. For example, I'll give you the most obvious example. In Vedic times, animals were sacrificed during rituals. It's not a subject for debate, by the way. It's very clearly there in the Yajurveda, so you can't debate it. Animals were indeed sacrificed as part of Vedic rituals in most ancient times. So suppose you were to pull out those rules from the Veda that dictate the performance of these sacrifice of animals and hold them out today as saying, hey, we should practice these traditions. That is the fundamentalism which has been rejected. And just to make an observation, I think it looks to me that by and large, Hindus have done a really good job of not holding on to outmoded ideas and concepts. Suppose we were to compare some traditions. There is a danger, this is an interesting observation, the danger of hierarchy. Now, it's been observed by many that Christians have a very elaborate hierarchy or organization to their religion. And as such, it's often said that Christianity is the world's greatest organized religion. And it is highly organized, and you can't deny that the success of the religion is in part due to its high degree of organization. Highly organized. There's a downside to organization. Many of you experience it if you work for a large corporation. Right? If you work for a large corporation, every day you experience the downside of hierarchy. How hierarchy is like having handcuffs. It limits you, it restricts you, and causes a lot of problems. Hinduism is the polar opposite. In fact, it leads to you've all heard this joke, right? Somebody says Christianity is the world's greatest. A Christian says Christianity is the world's greatest organized religion, and the Hindu replies, well, Hinduism is the world's greatest disorganized religion. You've all heard that. And disorganized in the sense that there's no hierarchy. There's no Pope in Varanasi who dictates to all Hindus what they should and should not do. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. Because the downside, when you put a lot of power in a small number of hands, things get distorted. Not only that, but there's a tendency for a hierarchy, like in a big corporation. Corporations frequently don't transform themselves, don't change very rapidly. They become outmoded because of the hierarchy. Hierarchy is like a lot of momentum. It's hard to shift. The example that's given is a really big, heavy ship in the ocean, a giant ship. If that ship wants to turn left, it can take that ship an hour to make that turn because of its weight and because of its momentum going forward. In the same way, a major corporation has to respond to changes in whatever, changes in the marketplace. But huge corporations are like those big ships. They can shift, but it takes them a long time. Christianity has a big hierarchy, and because of that hierarchy, we could argue that it shifts more slowly. Hinduism lacks the burden of that hierarchy. The result is something that, to me, looks much more natural, much more organic, which means small groups of Hindus change according to changes in culture and society and time. It's a very natural response. Small groups evolve naturally. In the absence of an overriding structure or hierarchy, small groups can change in a much more natural way. It looks like a great blessing for the Hindu tradition. And perhaps that's why fundamentalism is probably less of an issue in the Hindu tradition. As I said, it's not absent. I gave you the example. If a Swami says we're ready to cut off the heads of those Muslims, then we know that fundamentalism is a problem, but perhaps less of a problem. Okay. And karya apeksham anantaram. Everything depends on the outcome, on the results, on the effects. And with this, Ajagara finishes this answer to Yuddhishthira's question. Yuddhishthira has another question, which we'll see in our next class. We'll do that. Om sarve bhavantu sukhinaha sarve santu niramayaha sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kasyid dukkha bhag bhaveta asato ma satgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sorry, we will do Arati in just a moment. All of our other classes end with those prayers. So I'm like a trained dog. All right. We also have some announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our program for teenagers at 11 o'clock. Also, our Gita at Work study group meets tomorrow at 11 o'clock. You're all invited. Tomorrow at 5 is our mindful awareness meditation session. And at 6:15, I conduct a question-answer satsang tomorrow on Sunday. A week from today, we're going to celebrate Ram Navami. So please note, you should come at 11 o'clock. The meditation program will not be there. Come at 11 o'clock. We'll have nice puja, some chanting. I'll have a nice discourse. We'll also have prasad afterwards. There's a sign-up sheet over on the counter. If you're coming, please plan on bringing a dish of food. Go over to the counter, sign up on that list. That list needs to be full by the end of our class today. The other announcement is also to announce that we're starting to get ready for our anniversary celebration. I know I made these announcements before. A few of you may not have attended our meditation program, so I'll just announce very briefly that our 16th anniversary is planned for June 4th, Saturday, June 4th. Please mark your calendar. On that occasion, we're bringing out another souvenir, and we'd like to invite you to place advertisements or messages in a souvenir. If you know of someone who has a business, please bring it to their attention. This is all tax deductible. There are forms over on the board. If you need information, you can speak to Mohan. Mohan, just stand up. They can see who you are. So please participate and make our souvenir a great success as you have in past years. The library will be open after class. We'll conclude with our arati. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayah Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.